I said at the beginning that the breakfast on the beach story kind of roughly splits into two parts. The bit before breakfast and then the conversation between Peter and Jesus after breakfast. And we're going to read that second part of the story. So again, if you've got a Bible in front of you, whether it's a paper one or an electronic one. So we're John 21 and we're going to start at verse 15 this time. So John 21, verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had asked, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Because of this, the rumor spread among the believers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you?" This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. So let's think about this part of the story. I wonder whether you've ever done anything that you were ashamed of or that you are ashamed of. Those of you who are familiar with the Easter story will remember that a week or so before these particular events happened, Jesus had been talking with his disciples. And Peter had said that he was prepared to follow Jesus wherever he went, whatever the cost was going to be. He even said that he was prepared to die for Jesus. But Jesus had told Peter that he was going to deny even knowing him 3 times. And Peter argued, but that is what happened. And Jesus, after Jesus had been arrested, Peter was standing around at a distance watching what was going on. And some people recognized that Peter was one of Jesus' disciples, and they started to question him. But Peter claimed that they didn't know what they were talking about. "You've mistaken me for someone else." And he denied Jesus 3 times. And when he realized what he had done, he was devastated. He'd let his best friend down when he needed him most. And I wonder how many times Peter had replayed that scenario over the previous couple of weeks. I wonder how many times he played that scenario through in his mind after the resurrection, knowing that Jesus was now alive again, and Jesus knew what he had done, that he'd let Jesus down, that he'd shown that he was unreliable, he was unfaithful. And whatever plans Jesus may have had for Peter before this, I'm fairly confident that Peter was feeling that he had no part in Jesus' plans now. Jesus would not want to rely on Peter or trust him ever again. Maybe that's why Peter went fishing on this morning. One of my questions about this story was Peter going fishing a good thing or a bad thing? Was it something he was supposed to do, or was it something he was not supposed to do? Maybe he had in his mind, he'd written himself off in terms of God's plans for him. And he felt that Jesus had all those amazing plans. Jesus had said, I will send you out to fish for people, but I've blown it. All I'm good for is catching fish. And so maybe that's his motivation for getting back in his boat and going out to fish. Maybe he didn't think that he was a part of God's plans anymore. And it turns out that he can't even fish for fish either. He spends the whole night fishing and catches nothing. And I'm sure that many of us have been in not Peter's exact position, but a similar position to Peter. We've made promises to Jesus that we have not kept. And then we start to question about whether we have got a part to play in God's plans at all. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And here, over breakfast, Jesus gives Peter 3 opportunities to confess his love for Jesus. And each time he does that, Jesus gives him a role, a task to do. Peter may have let Jesus down 3 times, but Jesus wants Peter to know that he has been reinstated, that he is still a part of his plan. He's still a part of God's plan. Peter made a mistake, but it wasn't the end of the road. And our mistakes aren't the end of the road. Jesus wants to forgive us. He wants to reinstate us. He wants to give us a fresh start and a new beginning. And almost the first thing that Peter does is turn around, see someone else, and say, well, what about him? And I think it can be like that with us as well. We're often tempted to look around the church family and say, well, what about him? What about her? What about them? And Jesus, as Jesus said to Peter, Jesus says to us, well, what is that to you? You need to get on with following me. You get on with doing the things that I've asked you to do, and don't worry about what I'm doing in the lives of those around you. Just a few reflections from the final chapter in John's Gospel. I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to hand back to Sharon.